Okay, so today's topic is family in Christ, the legacy of a Christ-centered family. So last week, we talked about community, um, and so I thought community was such a good topic to transition into because community is really your family, right? So I wanted to share something with you guys. Hi, Shamira. I know, Daddy's talking, baby. Down, down, down. Right there, she wants to hang out with us. Um, yeah, so we want to uh we were talking about family, and I thought, well, we're talking about community, and we were talking about family, and at the end of it, we had a list of some things that we said that we were gonna work on and do. And one of the ones was that I said was sharing the meetings or things that we were doing with some other people. And so um, I want to share a testimony from a young lady who I sent the last meeting that we did, and she had some notes. She wrote a letter. So yeah, I was going to start the meeting off by sharing that letter and showing what she had to say about our meeting last week. And I know, Nika, you weren't here, but yeah, we'll just kind of touch base on that. So let's see. Sorry, this thing's being so weird. All right, so it says, um, hi, Chris. Thanks again for sending me the summary of your chats. I truly love what you're doing with these meetings. Coincidentally, I've been ruminating over these passages lately as well. The idea of community and friendship really resonates with me because I tend to be a hermit. Laugh out loud. These passages have inspired and encouraged me to try and reconnect more with others. Interestingly, on the radio just this week, they were discussing the rise of terrorism and how it's related to the breakdown of family and community. As humans, we're wired to be tribal and seek a sense of belonging. As families and communities have become increasingly dispersed, individuals are more susceptible to being lured into cults and extremist groups. With regard to Christianity, it's important.
Mailman just read.
All right, Tita, we're just gonna mute you there. Oh, with regard to Christianity, it's important to live out our faith so that people see it slash us. If we keep it too much to ourselves and privatize the faith, we're not going to be able to inspire others to join in the living body of Christ and the church. Church, the community starting here. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Anyone want to comment on that? You, Auntie Don, you're going to say something?
I was just saying, I think from letter, I think what she's saying, the same thing some of us actually said last week about being afraid, or the way things are, people are being afraid to communicate with other people, and everybody's just trying to keep to themselves, stay indoor, hermit, as she says, and because everyone's afraid to get involved or get hurt.
Yeah. And I didn't,
Yeah.
to be
I
honest,
think that's what she's saying.
no, yeah. And I think I didn't even read when I picked the topic of family, I didn't even read this second paragraph where she says, as families and communities have become increasingly dispersed, individuals are more susceptible
Mhm.
to be lured into cults and extremist groups. And so it was interesting because she wasn't here and we didn't have this conversation and I didn't talk to her about this topic either. But it kind of, I thought it was interesting to see that, we were connected in that same process. So as we go on to the transition, so like I said before, this idea of community and strength, it's so good to have this community. But then I think one of the biggest communities or the most important communities that we all have in some shape or some sense is family. So um, to start off, I wanted to go to Nehemiah. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the story of Nehemiah. It's not one of the most popular stories in the Bible, but I think it's a very important one. And I put the title of this slide, If You Don't Have Enemies, You Aren't Doing It Right. Essentially, when I think about Christ and I thought about Nehemiah, I thought about how when Christ was serving God, he was only doing the right thing all the time and he still had enemies. And then we have Nehemiah come along who, he wants to rebuild um, God's temple and he wants to do what's right. And even though he's doing something right, people are still coming to him and still trying to attack him and bring him down. And so in Nehemiah 4:14, as they're building the temple, Nehemiah says, after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. And so when I think about that, I think of what we see today, right? As we try to rebuild God's temple and we try to rebuild that sense of community and friends and family, how often, do we see those threats or see those people coming in trying to destroy our families? But what is the mindset that we have, understanding that, these attacks are coming in? Are we, fighting for our families and keeping them safe? Or maybe, sometimes we could be the enemies, we could be those people. So that's kind of what we're going to go into today. And we're going to talk about some different things and we're going to show some examples and go through some stuff. So let's go to the next slide. So this side is called Workers and Soldiers. So Nehemiah 4:17-18, it describes how the builders worked while staying prepared for battle. So it said, those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other, and each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the men who sounded the trumpet um, stayed with me. So the question that I wrote here was, how does this translate to how we work as soldiers in God's army? So um, if I could rephrase that a little bit better, I'm asking the question of, okay, if we understand that we're a part of God's army and we're in this journey, how does this idea of, you know, holding a tool to build and also holding some tools for war translate into the work that we're all supposed, or, in the case of last week, the work that we're supposed to do? What do you guys think that this means?
Well, for me,
You got a little echo there.
can you hear me now?
Yes, I think you guys might have the two audios on.
Yeah, we had the two audios on. Yeah, for me, my translation is, sometimes we're going to be trying to teach the word of God,
Mhm.
and we're trying to do that. And sometimes, like, you meet people and they're so resilient towards what you're doing. Just like you remember last week when the girl said she was really trying to preach to those people and they were being rude and nobody wanted to listen to her. So with one hand you're trying to spread the gospel, and another hand you have to be defending yourself and defending the gospel of itself.
Right.
So it's a journey for us. It's never easy doing God's work. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think that example of Kimmy is a perfect example of, sometimes I think as builders, we just think that we're just going to go out there and evangelize, and people are just going to be like, oh, yeah, this is so amazing. I just want to hear everything you have to say. But, like you said, we also have to hold our swords and also protect the word of God and protect ourselves, right? Because there's a lot of people that don't want us to build this work and don't want us to be families. Go ahead,
Yes.
Naima.
Hi. Yes, I think it also shows that when you're doing God's work, you can't be complacent, because they were working, but they couldn't take their eyes off the enemy. So they had to also be in a defensive form while they were doing God's work, because the enemy was after them. The enemy was trying to stop them. And whatever we do for God, we're going to come up against opposition. And Nehemiah and his workers, they all had oppositions. They tried to stop them. And that's showing us that no matter what we're going to do for Christ, we're going to have oppositions, and we have to be on the defensive side. We have to use all the weapons that God has given us to defend ourselves, while on the other hand, we're doing God's work as well. Yeah.
Yeah, amen. So now that we understand kind of the fight, the fact that, we're going to go through those struggles, we're going to go through those issues. I think one of the big things that I wanted to talk about with family is conflict resolution. So in every family, in every household, in every situation, you're going to face conflicts. And so where I wanted to start before we go into more of the family aspect of conflict, I wanted to start with this idea of your relationship with your spouse, because, and for those who aren't married, this is a step that you'll take. But for those that are married, you think of the idea of your wife or your husband being this person that you love, this person that you want to spend the rest of your life with. You have all these great, wonderful feelings for them, I hope. And if you can't love that person and you can't treat that person well, then it's going to be really hard for you to treat people at work really good. It's going to be really hard for you to treat, people in church really good, because you don't love those people the way you love your wife. So if you don't love your wife or your husband, in the way that God commands you to, it's really hard to um it's really hard to do God's work. And so some of the points I put here is that your relationship with your spouse sets the tone for your other relationships, right? So I think of my children, I think of my parents, my family, my coworkers, my neighbors, right? And I think what's really important for this is learning to communicate godly. So when you go to, um, and we'll go to Peter 3, but when we talk about learning to communicate godly, off the top of my head, I remember us talking about fruits of the spirit. So patience, kindness. I know that for me and my wife, we did I sent my wife some verses this week that really focused on communication and taking time to um, think about what I say before I say it. Think about how I'm saying it. Am I saying it with edification, with love? And Letitia, I hate to put you on the spot, but um, can you share a little bit about some of those verses and how that communication piece is so important in marriage?
Yeah, so I know that you sent me a few different verses. And I know we even chatted a bit about our communication because, I think communication is something that you're always working on continuously. You don't really get it perfect. And I think, what we do really well, I think for us is we really go back to the word to help support us with our communication. And, you know, you sent me actually a verse this morning. I think it was on Corinthians, I think it was 16 verse 14. And it was, let all your things be done with charity. And, we chatted about the fact that whenever we're looking to communicate, or if we're looking to resolve a dispute or a conflict, we always want to ensure that we're leading with love, we're leading with patience, we're leading with, kindness, gentleness, right? And I think that if we're leading with that, then how can we fail? And if we're leading with God, then how can we fail? And I think, a lot of those reflections and a lot of those verses that you sent to me over the past week or so have been very helpful for helping support my communication and my role in our marriage. And I think ultimately has allowed us to come together as one to really be a lot better in the way that we communicate. And so, when we think about marriage and what you're saying here, Chris, about the fact that it really sets the tone for how you actually interact with others, it really does, right? And I think, starting with that love and starting with that kindness is essential when you're thinking about communicating effectively with others and in your marriage. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yes, thank you. And as we jump to Peter 3 and 7, I never thought about this, but it says, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. Show honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. And so when I read this, I know, men, we have this idea that women are, you know, they're the weaker vessel, that they just need to listen to us. They need to follow us. But I think how God puts them on the equal level with us is that he says, at the end of the day, though, his plan or his provision for man and woman is that they both enter the kingdom, that they're both heirs, to salvation, that it's not that the man goes to heaven and the woman stays here, right? It's this idea that we're both supposed to go to the kingdom. And when you're not in line with your wife, if me and my wife are fighting or we're not, on good terms, that hinders my prayers. It's hard for me to go to God. It's hard for me to pray. It's hard for us to unite as a family and pray over our children or pray over our finances or pray over all the things that we're doing. And that leads into this last point here, which is seek forgiveness and align your hearts with God. And I think a lot of times in our relationship with our spouse and with our families, right? How many times do we seek forgiveness? And how many, like my wife said, what is it that we're aligning ourselves with? Are we aligning ourselves with what God says and what the word of God says? Or is it my feelings? And is it my, you know, I'm hurt or I'm angry, And so when we go to Ephesians 4:16, it says, address issues promptly to prevent bitterness. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. And even though I feel like this is a really simple and easy thing to do, it's one of those verses where I'm like, but do we actually practice that? And so reflecting on Ephesians 4:16, how can we practically, right? What's something that we actually can do to apply this directive in our daily family interactions? What steps can we take to ensure that conflicts are resolved before the day ends? So, who'd like to take a stab at that? What are some practical things that we can do?
Well, I guess I can start. I think for me and for us, I think when we're looking to um, kind of not let the sun go down on our anger, I think taking care of that in the moment, I think is important. I think, yes, you may be angry in that moment. Maybe it's a matter of taking an opportunity to pause, saying, let me take, a few minutes or so to kind of collect my thoughts and then come back to the table and have an edifying discussion, right? And I think you talked about in the last lesson or the lesson before that around taking that opportunity to pause, taking that opportunity to reflect, going to pray, going to God, going into the word, and then coming back to have that conversation. So I think instead of letting the sun go down, it's really about, well, how am I making sure in that moment, whether it's within the 5 minutes, 10 minutes after that conversation or dispute, I'm taking an opportunity to settle things and to really think through how I can come to the table to have that conversation. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, well, we're going to jump to the next slide because we're going to come back to this. It's going to come up ahead and we can talk a little bit more about this conflict resolution. I'll give you guys some more. So, on the next slide, We're gonna have a video from a show that I used to watch a lot of. And you guys probably know it. It's from the Maury Show. And the reason I chose the Maury Show for conflict resolution or for things within your spouse is the Maury Show really emphasizes this idea of things like sexual immorality, infidelity, lying, a lot of poor choices. And so when I think about that show, and we'll see in this clip, um, I want to illustrate. So I'll let the clip talk, and then we'll go. So let's see if it will play here. Oh, no, good. Okay, well, seems like it doesn't want to play for me. Well, I'll surmise it for you. So basically, there's a young man here who he's being accused of having a child out of wedlock, and he's not sure if the child is her, and he's accusing the woman who has the child of being a liar and being a scammer, and he doesn't believe that the child is his. And now, I won't even say that. I was going to say that this is an extreme case, but for some people's families, this is not, right? Some people's families, you know, children out of wedlock is very common. Dysfunctional families are very common, and we see that a lot in the Black community. And so, when I think about, like my wife said, some things that we can do to not allow, a lot of these issues or things to fester, I think look at the difference between how families in the world operate. These families where often in a lot of these shows and these situations, we don't see parents, we don't see grandparents, we don't see elders, we don't hear about biblical things, right? So when these people talk about the reasons that, they don't think the children are theirs or they don't think the person is this, we don't hear anything about God, right? God is not in these conversations. And so as we go forward and we talk a little bit more about God, we're going to address some of these things. So, oh, here he goes. It turns on. I don't know if you guys can hear that.
These women are known across the world for pinning babies on men they know aren't the father. And that's exactly what Sanjiana's trying to do to me, and I'm not having it. She know I'm a personal owner of my family ice cream shop. She's just trying to get a scoop of your money any way she can. And don't forget, Adriana, I saw the messages you was writing to them guys on Facebook, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. I got in an accident on the monkey.
So basically in that clip, right? And I love Americans, but they make us look bad as a community. But what I want to illustrate there is that realistically, and I don't know about everybody else, there's a lot of things like that are very embarrassing and ungodly that are happening in our families. And so even though these terrible things happen, right? What are some things that we can do to kind of fix it? And so one of the things I wanted to talk about with everyone was how do we communicate an issue? So tell me if someone wants to share right now, what are some of the ways that we communicate issues? Or tell me your strategy. If you have a problem with someone in your family, how do you do it? How should you do it?
I think, Christopher, is always to look at the problem as spiritual. As the Bible said, you're not wrestling with flesh and blood. And when you look at it from that perspective, you will enter that communication with grace. So if I have an issue with a family member, I still should love them. And even though sometimes they make it difficult, but it's to do it in a godly way, which means I'm fighting against the enemy. And if I look at it like that at all times, I will still pray for them. I will still try to help them to see from godly perspective. We're not always going to agree, but if we bring both our concerns to God, most likely we'll get some kind of resolution for it. However, if we try to hold on to what we want or what we believe, because we're always going to be right when it comes to family issues, everyone is right. And sometimes we can't see where we're going wrong, and the other person can't see where they're going wrong. Hence, it's going to be unending problems. However, if we decide to bring it to God, most of the time, I would say all the time, God is going to show us our part in the issue, and also praying for the other party as well. And I believe just having that grace at all times, that you're not hating the person, you're not fighting against them, you're fighting the enemy, will always help us to come out better.
Okay, so how? Like, how do you, like, literally how? So let's
Mhm.
say, I don't know, let's say I ate your roti. You had a roti at home, you just came back from work, you worked a long shift, and you open the fridge, your roti's gone. How would you communicate that you have an issue with me taking your things and not asking?
As I mentioned before, it's from a place of grace. So God shows us love and demonstrate love. And I can use myself as an example, because oftentimes growing up teenagers, they're going to do things that you don't want them to do. As you said, they might take something that doesn't belong to them, eat your best mango, whatever.
Mhm.
And my way of dealing with that, I had experiences before where, say, for instance, my daughter would leave something in the sink, like a cup, and she didn't wash it where she knows not to do it. But
Mhm.
I look at it in a way, but God has done so much for me. All the time I made mistake, all the time I've done something that I'm not supposed to do, and God forgives me. So I'm not even going to knock on my daughter's door and tell her to come and wash the cup, because God would have done it for me. And that's the way how I go through life physically, just looking at things at all times, that God would have done it for me. So I need to do that the same way for others and extend that love and grace to other people.
Okay, yeah, okay, I see that. Anika, I know you have your hand raised.
Hi, everyone. So based on your question, Chris, I'm going to look at it from the perspective of my husband and I. Um, I know some of you don't know me, but I've said this a few times. I'm working on patience. So I'll just throw that out there. When it comes on to my husband and I, if we do have a disagreement, or not even a disagreement, something that I may not have liked or thought it should have been done differently, as I said before I got married, I kind of practiced with my dad. That's how I did it. So if, for example, my dad and I are having some form of issue, I would lower my voice and I would speak to him with love. I would speak to him very calmly, very lowly, because at the end of the day, I had to understand that. And I didn't use the scripture at that time, but through the conversations that you were having now, Chris, I was looking at a scripture and I saw a soft answer turneth away wrath. And even though I wasn't doing that based on the scripture, it clicked to me that that was what I was doing. So what I did, and I brought it over into my marriage, is that I lower my voice and I speak with love. So even though I'm annoyed, I will say, but babe, da 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 da. So I'll add in babe or add in things like that, just to make sure that I don't get loud or rowdy. And I have to understand that we're not perfect. And if I had made a mistake, I don't want to be shouted at or screamed at. I want to be spoken to just the same with love. So that's what I use. I hope that answers it.
No, yeah. And I just wanted to see how people communicate issues, because I think sometimes we know how we what we should do, right? But then how do you actually, and I like the example with your dad, right? You understood that, okay, maybe, and I don't know your dad, but maybe your dad's the person that doesn't react to, aggression or yelling very well, right? So you come to him in a soft way. You talk to him in a nice way where, you don't just say, yo, dad, why don't you this or that or blah, blah, blah. Like, hey, dad, da, 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 and I really appreciate it. You did this to me today. And I was wondering if you could help me, blah, blah, or what, whatever your verbiage is. But the reason I asked that question is because when, the overarching topic is family, a lot of times when we communicate our issues or our grievances or our problems, right? I think about the place where a lot of us, or I think about the timing of when a lot of us express our grievances, right? And as we saw in the previous slide, it said, promptly seek for forgiveness and move on, right? And how many times do we really address those issues in the moment? And sometimes, I like what Rima said, we'll do the right thing, but then sometimes when you're that person who's always doing the right thing and you take it on the chin 4 or 5, 6 times, sometimes you have that slip up. Sometimes that human of you comes out and you get upset or you get angry or you don't use the right tone, or you say, I'm tired of cleaning up after you every day, Anika. You're so lazy. You don't do anything in the house, right? And I think that when we don't take that time to sometimes address those issues in the moment and we let it fester, we let it sit, sometimes we give it that opportunity to fester and to blow up into something big. And I don't know about everybody else here, but I know that, have you ever been in a situation where you're in an argument with someone and the thing that you started the argument with ends up not being the thing that you guys are talking about? So maybe, you didn't put your shoes away or you didn't put up your jacket, and then now the person's telling you how you never pay for bills, or, you missed their, I don't know, their piano recital and they're upset. So I think sometimes it's very important that we learn to communicate issues in the moment, but we learn to communicate them properly. And so these are some things that I wrote that I think will help us communicate our issues better, which is be specific. So don't use words like, you always do this, or you never buy me, flowers. I think sometimes when we use that language, it's look at the situation and isolate it and just say, in this moment, you said X or you did X. It's not every time. It's not that they never love you or they never, when we do that, we're taking away from the thing that we're trying to communicate. And then when we talk about the behavior, what exactly did you do? And I think for a lot of us here, if you had West Indian parents, and Reem, I'm going to let you jump in. I remember growing up, my parents would get upset about things, but they wouldn't explain to me what my behavior was. Like they'd say, "Oh, you're very rude. You guys need to be more respectful." But the thing is, sometimes it's adding that extra piece and saying, "Hey, I'm your parent. And so when you talk to me, yeah, you can be frustrated or you can be angry, but you don't have to swear or you don't have to use bad words or you don't have to use that tone of voice. Say what you're saying, but say it calmly." Right. And so that's another, thing that I think we have to work on, which is explaining what our issues are. So Rima, go ahead, jump in.
Yes, Chris.
Yeah, it's me, and it's so funny, right? Because my sister is still on the line, Auntie Dawn. Oh, she's probably gone. But
Yes, sir, I'm on the line. Are you gonna talk about me?
no, this this is Auntie Dawn's specialty. I think we have learned a lot from her in this department, because she's always a disciplinarian and she's always taught us how to hack. You know what I'm saying? So we would know what's coming at the end of a misbehavior and how to deal with it. And at the time, we didn't see it as anything educated. We just thought she was mean. And then when we start growing up and having our own children and and even wives and getting married, like you said, the argument never ends at the argument that it started with. Like you say, if I ate the bread, it didn't went to the bread. It went to I never bought you flowers last time and I never did that. And I'm gonna do that. So if we realize that as much as we say we don't carry these things, if we doesn't keep them inside, we do. We often do in relationship. Trust me, once you have gotten married, you realize that these things are kept in a vault. And sometimes my wife told me some stuff. I'm like, whoa, when did I say that again? I don't remember. She said, oh, you said it like they have the date and the time written down. I'm like, oh, that's kind of crazy. 'Cause I didn't remember that one. You get what I'm saying? So I say to my wife, you know what I like, what I demand from my wife is if you want to talk to me about something, say it to me nicely so I don't lose my manhood. Because a lot of people don't understand to a man, it's very important for him to feel like a man because we are the man. We have that statue as a man. So when you come to me and being disrespectful and saying something that hurts my feeling, even if I want to admit that I'm wrong, I won't. I won't. Because the real me, because remember, not everybody's a man of God. And even though you're a man of God, sometimes you have to be the real you. It does come out. And you're not going to feel that way because you're going to feel disrespected. So you're going to retaliate. That's why you have abuse, spousal abuse, all these kind of things. But God keeps you so grounded. If you're a really grounded man, you're going to say to my wife, you know what? We're not having discussion right now. Like I always tell my wife, if you want to say something, just say it nice. Say, babes, you know what? You know, you miss that thing for the last few days. What's it going to be this year? Find some words, find some things that can neutralize the anger in you. And then, if your husband or your boyfriend is a real man, he will go away and the God in him will speak to him and he come back and he say, babes, you know what? You were really right about last week. I'm sorry I didn't do that, but I'm going to change this year. I'm going to try to do better in 2025, you know? So that's just my take.
Yeah, and you covered a lot of great points there, and I'll touch on a few briefly because we're going to come back to them. But you touched on the idea of not living in the past, and I think sometimes the devil wants us to stay in the past because when we stay in all those hardships and negativities and traumas and things, we don't get to enjoy the things that God wants to do in our future, the things that God's doing presently. And it's funny, I was talking to my wife yesterday, and I sat down and I had to apologize to my wife, and I said, babe, I don't communicate to you in a way that's sometimes always loving or always nice. And I thought about some of the things or the way that I communicated to her, and and in that moment, things that she was saying or she was doing, that had nothing to do with something from the past. But because I hadn't let go of those things from the past, because I hadn't, you know, been honest with myself and said, hey, that hurts you or this hurts you. And what she did in the past isn't what she's doing today. And that's not who the person she is today. You've already forgiven her for those things. So why are you carrying that same energy towards her? And so when we go to Ephesians 5:25, it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And I love that my dad talked about last point, which was impact. How did that make you feel? And I think something that well, all praises to the Most High, that I see differently in my dad's life than what I saw before is my dad really has learned to express his feelings and express how things make him feel. And, you know, you'll probably tell people that, but when we were being raised and when we were growing up, you weren't allowed to cry. You couldn't express how things made you feel, right? As a man, you're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to just take everything full force and not express your feelings, and you're strong. But when we're talking about communication and families, it's very important to talk about your feelings and not to let those feelings linger. But then we see the example that Christ has set for us, right, as husbands and as men. And it's not saying men be right and tell your wives what to do or to be prideful. It's saying love your wives as Christ loved the church, and Christ gave up everything, right? Even when Christ didn't sin, he died on the cross. So even when we're communicating some of our issues, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, let's also keep that in the back of our minds of how Christ is. So now that we've talked about how to communicate our issues, right? And I apologize for this lesson because we're gonna, I'm gonna probably prick a few people, but I know it definitely pricks me when I was making this, but it's how do we receive, right? Because we talked about how to communicate. So we always can tell the people communicating, you should say it nicely, you should this, you should that. But what does that look like for us as the people receiving the message? And so one thing that I wanted to talk about was listening, not to reply. So how many times are we in a conversation with someone, or we're in an argument with our spouse or a family member, and the moment we say something, they have something to say back. They haven't even taken that 1 second or that 2 seconds to say, okay, you know what, Auntie Dawn, like, I could just put away the dishes. You did ask me a couple weeks ago to put that away. And when she comes to me and she says, you didn't put away the dishes, you didn't sweep the floor, you didn't this, I'll say, well, I didn't have time, and this and that, and I'm not listening. I'm not actively listening to what she's saying. She's not asking me to explain to her why I didn't do the dishes, why I feel this way about what she said. She just wants me to get these things done. So in that moment, if I was listening, I would have said to her, Auntie Don, I'm gonna go put the dishes away right now, and I'm gonna go get that done. And I'm sure that wouldn't cause a conflict between us, right? And then we go to point number 2, and this is one that I love. Try to understand before being understood. And I think that one is so powerful, because I think, especially as men, we always want our wives to understand us before we understand them. And I think sometimes what we have to learn to do is to have self-control enough to listen, right? Listen, not to reply. Listen, see where she's coming from, understand what she's saying, right? And that goes into our next point, which is
Yes,
validate.
because the
Go
wife
ahead.
is always
Pardon?
right.
The wife is always right.
Remember that, gentleman. The wife is always right.
Well, it has less to do with
The
the
wife
wife
is
being right.
always right.
It,
Yeah, wife is always right.
it's about the
What
fact that even if
right
she's,
to make your wife right?
I wish that's what
Like
it
you
was.
say, listen. No, like you say, try to listen and don't respond. And sometimes that doesn't even help, because you know what the wife thinks? He's not even listening to me because he didn't respond.
Mhm.
I think I never married, so I can't tell you guys anything about that. But I think people on the whole like to be heard, and they like to have response. That's the whole point of the argument. So if you don't respond to me and I ask you something, you didn't respond, either you didn't hear me or you didn't feel like you should respond in any way to me. So it makes me feel like I'm not even being acknowledged. So
Right.
I just think couples need to find a different way, godly way, and think about it. What did God do in this situation? And both people need to be able to listen to each other and decide. Chris, we were talking about debating yesterday, and that's
Mhm.
another way, like high and low, wrong. Does it really matter who is right? Does it matter who is wrong? As long as we have a good relationship and a good communication going, that we know that when I say to you, she's wash, you can explain to me, well, unfortunately, I didn't get around to doing right now. I was doing X, Y, and Z. But a lot of time people feel, why should I explain myself? I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I don't need to explain to you that I had to go down the road, or I had to go to the bathroom, or I had a stomach ache. I don't feel like doing any of that. I think that's probably sometime what happens. I don't know, because like I said, I've never been in the situation, but I've had a lot of kids around me.
Yeah, and I think, I know as jokingly people say things like, happy wife, happy life, but I think it's the opposite, right? I think it's happy husband, happy life, because when you as a man now, right, as Christ loves the church, so he gave everything up for the church. He sets the example for us. So now, as men now, if we start to listen to our wives to understand them, right? Because Ephesians told us to honor our wives as the weaker vessel, to deal with them with understanding. Didn't say deal with them with fear and trembling and rule over them. It said to deal with her with understanding, right? And I think by listening and validating and saying, honey, you're right. I understand that. Because remember, when we talked about how to express your feelings, when you come to him now, you're not just going to say to him, oh, why didn't you do the dishes today? Or why didn't you cut the grass? Or when are you going to go do this? Right? You're saying, hey, you didn't cut the grass today. When I came home, I had a lot going on and it stresses me out when I come home and there's a lot of mess. Right? And then he can say to you, okay, you know what? I understand where you're coming from. Coming home to a mess is probably not the best for you. So you know what? I apologize, right? Which is the thing here. I can make sure that when you come home from now on, I try to keep the house a lot more cleaner. And then not only do I apologize, I actually do it. So when my wife comes home tomorrow, the house is tidy, right? The lawn is mowed or the laundry is done for her, right? I do things. And I think sometimes we will apologize, but we don't do anything. We'll validate, but we won't do anything. We'll make amends for it, but we won't apologize, right? So I think if we learn to add these tools into our repertoire of being people that can, apologize, we can listen and not reply, we can understand before being understood, we can validate what people are saying, and we can learn to apologize, right? I think the apologize part is so big because I think a lot of us will say, okay, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Well, I apologize. Why is the person? No, what are you apologizing for? What did you do? Right? Acknowledge your behaviors, acknowledge the bad things, listen to what the person is saying, acknowledge it, and then change it. Not just say, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, tap your knives, right? No, acknowledge it, go and change it. And I think when we take that more loving approach and we take that approach of showing, remember, this is our family. These aren't our coworkers, these aren't strangers. These are people that we love. These are people that in sickness and health are going to be there for us. In good times, they're going to be there for us. So keep that in mind. And so when you read Matthew 5 and 9, it said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And so when I think of that, when I first read this and I thought about being understood, understanding before being understood and validating, that was hard. Like, people that know me, that's hard. Because I'm sitting there saying, oh, well, why do I have to validate people's opinions that are wrong? Why do I have to apologize to people that I never did anything wrong to? Why am I making amends for things when you hurt me? And then again, I went back to Christ. I thought, okay, well, how much sin did Christ really do? Right? And he died on the cross for me. So isn't that the ultimate reconciliation between man and God? Christ dying on the cross for me. So if Christ can do that for me, why as a man or as a woman would we sit here and have this pride or have this thing up in our mind that because we're right or because we're this, we can't apologize, we can't amend, we can't validate, we can't understand where somebody else is coming from, we can't listen to what they're saying and not feel like, oh, I need this and you did this and no, that's not, you're not making peace between your brother and sister or your spouse or your family. That's what God has called us to do. And so I really just want everybody just to like ingest that and just really try that and tell me if that doesn't work, if that doesn't make your relationships with your family better. And I know Anika brought this verse up. It was James 1:19. It says, know this, my brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And then we go Colossians 3:13, which says, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you have a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And that's something that, Rima brought up with her daughter, that idea. And so we're going to move on to this next clip. And this is from a movie called Crooklyn. And it's about this black family. And I'll let the clip play, but I'm going to ask you guys a question. And as we watch it, I want you guys to kind of tell me where this family goes wrong, or tell me some of the things that you notice here. So I know that this thing, and I know that I put these things in and they worked so well for me last time. And then when I put them in here, now it's like they don't want to work for me. Okay, well, I think I know how I can do it. I don't know if it's because it's like a bigger file. Of course, when I go on here, it doesn't. Oh, because it did load. Okay, well, I'll just play it for us on YouTube. But basically, we watched this clip and I thought about, black families, and it's sad that this is what, the black family is, but okay. Yeah, they're gonna see it right now. Okay. All right, so you guys can see that. You guys hear the audio on that, or is that really low?
What? Don't answer me. What? Turn the goddamn TV off. I'm watching the Knicks. I don't care what it is. No TV on a school night. She can scream what she want. I'm watching this game. Hey! No TV. Turn it off. Mom, it's just a game. Who is that? That was Nate. It wasn't me, Mommy.
On the campus, University of Maryland.
Chastise your boys. Hey! Good, don't let me get up there. In a minute. Oh, please stop paying my bill. Black no walk crazy, Carolyn. Surprise, boys. The big deal is I said no TV on a school night, damn it. The Knicks got a job. You need an education, boy. I will throw this idiot box out the window.
Troy, that push in the bathroom.
Daddy, she won't let me watch the game. How dare you go to your father's and find me, boy?
Come on now, Jim. Let him watch the game. Let's go downstairs.
No, Woody, please don't touch me. Don't touch me now.
Come on, Jim.
Get your hands off of me. Shut up. I own this Mary house. I pay Con Ed for the electricity. Now, when you want to start paying some of the bills, then everybody else gets to decide when you put the TV on and when not. I'm watching this game. What? I'm going to knock you out.
Okay, so I'll pause it there. But basically, they go on, they have a fight, and the mom kicks the dad out of the house. What are some things that we see there? What does anybody? I don't know. Could you guys hear the audio there? Oh.
Yeah.
What were some things that we saw from that?
I believe the mom, she wasn't setting great example, because as parents, we are our children role models, and children model what they obviously know. And just the way the mom was speaking to the children, I don't think that was coming from a place of good parenthood. There was no respect, there was no line. There was no boundaries. It was a lot of shouting and screaming as a mother. And you should be able to communicate with your children on a respectable level where they do understand where you're coming from. But by shouting, I said that to somebody once. She was trying to stop her daughter from doing something, but she was shouting, like she said, Sanaya. And I was like, does she even understand what you're trying to say to her? I mean, go over there and communicate with her what you're trying to say rather than shouting. And I believe that's what the mom was doing. She wasn't modeling a good mother to me. That's how I say it. And that would cause the children to be rebellious, because human nature, we're naturally rebellious, whether children or adults. And when you shout at someone, they automatically develop a rebellious attitude. And that's where it's at with that family.
Yeah, no, and those are really good points. Anybody else? Anybody else want to touch on? So we talked about the yelling piece, right? What else did we see there? A little
Lots of
more,
confusion.
right?
Lots of confusion. Nobody knows talking what they're really supposed to do, and there's no real rules set up. So mom is stressed, she's scared, and she's just acting out her stress and her frustration for whatever reason, may not even have anything to do with why documents in the first place. But like we say, when we don't listen to each other, when we don't communicate well, and move the situation and by saying you go here, you go there, and this is what we're gonna do from now on. But then she didn't have that time, because all she's expressing is how she feels, stress or hunger, not anything to do with the kids at all.
Yeah, that's a very good point that she, and to give it a little context of the clip. So the mom works two jobs, and so she really runs the house. She's doing everything, and the dad's a jazz musician, and he's not really, as you can see in the clip, he was saying to her like, "Oh, let the kids watch the TV, let them watch the game, and stop, being so hard on the kids, and so we see that, but I think my dad, you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, you know how we just spoke about how we have things that is festered up inside of us and we're carrying all these things with us?
Mm-hmm.
Wife have been carrying all these things. First of all, her husband's not making enough money. He's not able to run the household. So she's already resented him for her have to work two jobs. So automatically, he's lost the man within the family. He's no longer the king of this castle. He's no longer a father. He's just seen as a man who probably gave birth to these children. Because if you notice, she went upstairs and she demanded. She never said to her husband, "Hun, the kids are watching the TV at a certain time and whatever, whatever." And he would have gone up and spoke to them. But no, she took it upon herself, speaking that the man had no right. She was clearly the ruler of the family. So it shows you again how, like I say, a man can be disrespected in his home based on the fact that he's not being a good provider, on the fact that this is not a house genuinely built out of love. So you can see they're all dysfunctional for me.
And to put it again in the context too, she said to him, well, she said to all of them, right? She said the moment that because she corrected herself, she said, "I pay for this house." But the husband used to be rich as a jazz, and he bought the house initially. But like you said, when he stopped making money and he stopped providing, she said, "Well, you know what? I pay the electric bill." So the time that any of you guys start paying the electric bill, then you guys can start telling me what to do inside this house. And Letitia, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what Dad was saying, around the fact that there was an innate disrespect of the father in front of the children, and I think it really undermined his authority as being that authoritative figure within the household. And it also created kind of this tension and division because you have your kids seeing this, and now they're picking sides with respect to who they want to kind of side with, and that really created that confusion and conflict. And I think it was dad that was saying around the fact that now you have all this confusion, now you have all this tension, now you have all this dysfunction, and it really modeled negative behavior and negative communication amongst the entire family, right? So I think we really have to look at how they were how she was respecting authority, and there was no respect there. And therefore, if you're not respecting your husband, your kids are also not going to respect you and or your husband. So I thought I just wanted to kind of point that out, and really how that damages also their relationship, between, husband and wife, and how that erodes and also therefore erodes their relationship with their kids. So just wanted to call that out.
Yeah. And I didn't play the rest of the clip, but at the end of the clip, they get into a fight. They're on the stairs, and the mother says to him, call your brother, get your stuff, get out of the house, get out of my house. And she kicks him out, and he's like, fine, if that's what you want, then I'll leave. I'll go do my own thing. And the kids are upset, and the kids are like, like, look what you guys did. Now dad is gonna leave. And when I think about our families, and when I think about, decisions that we make sometimes as adults, right? Like, how many times have we seen aunts and uncles or mom and dad or different people fight? And do they ever consider how that, Auntie Donna's my favorite aunt. Let's say she gets into a fight with my mom, and then now I can't go spend summers with Auntie Dawn, or I can't because there's an issue between her and my mom that has nothing to do with me. But now we see how not only our conflicts affect each other, but it also affects our families. It affects, our children's access to us and to each other and to their broader family members. And I think sometimes as adults, we can be very selfish, not to think about the fact that the choices that we make don't always just affect us. They affect our children, they affect our family members. And so we have to always keep that in mind. And so as we draw that modern parallel from the 80s in Brooklyn, I wanted to talk about Luke 15, the prodigal son's return and his father's forgiving response, and how that illustrated repentance and forgiveness. Because when I think about most people's understanding of forgiveness, I think a lot of us take this stance of, well, I did this for you, you squandered it, you didn't do it, so don't come back to me, don't call me, don't talk to me. I did everything for you, and you threw it in the garbage and you wasted it. So, I'm taking my blessing, I'm going on my way. But I think when we look at the story of the prodigal son, right, even though there was no more inheritance for him to get, right, the father still welcomed him. The father was still glad to see him, to have him around. And he didn't sit there and dwell on the fact that he was a sinner, he did all these terrible things. He didn't care about that. He said, you know what, my son is back. I'm glad to see you. I'm glad that you're back home. Let us, have some food and celebrate that you're back, and let's move on. And when I think about a lot of us, and how we operate, how many of us want to do that? How many of us, like, as Jamaicans, let's be honest, we all have a family member, we have a cousin, somebody that thief, we have an auntie, we have somebody that did something to us. If that person comes back into your life tomorrow, if that person apologizes and repent, are you really ready in your heart to forgive that person and let that person come back in? Right? So, I leave that one there. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was finances and financial. I think my dad alluded to it in the last clip. And it actually is such a good point, which is, and I'll read this verse here, Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. And in a lot of families, the reason that we see dysfunction, or the reason that we see lack of unity, is because we have a lot of family members who make poor financial decisions. And so, like the father in the movie, he was a jazz musician. He didn't believe in playing rock and roll, so he didn't want to play that kind of music because he didn't like it. So he didn't end up making enough money to pay the light bill, and they lose their lives. But when we think about all the chaos and problems that ensued from that, he let his own, volition and feelings circumvent his responsibility, which is, hey, you're a father, you have children, you have a family, you have to go and work, you have to go and do things, you have to figure things out. You can't sit there and say, well, I don't want to, play this kind of music, or I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. Like, focus, do the things that you need to do. And so on the opposite side of that, right, I think of a lot of families where there's family members that are operating in the spirit of greed, right? So we address that as, people in a family. It's important for us to make good financial decisions. It's important for us to not be selfish and just think, okay, well, how does this help me? How is this good for me, right? On the flip side, we have family members who have lots of money, who are very rich, who have tons of money, but they don't use that wealth to do things for their family. And sometimes, I was watching a show and a guy asked people, what's the one thing in your life, if you could have one thing right now that would make your life better, what would you ask for? And the lady said money. And the guy said, it's funny, people always say money, but when you think about that, money doesn't always equate to the thing that you want, which is usually peace of mind, which is, time with your family, or the ability to do things that you love, or having free time and not having to do anything. Sometimes when we want money, or we want to make money, you have to work harder. You have to put in more time. You don't get to see your family. You have more things to worry about, because with more wealth comes more responsibility. And so sometimes I think a lot of us are operating in a spirit of greed, because if I think about it, God is a God of abundant resources, and God has everything. So if God has an infinite amount of resources, why do we cut off family members because of loans or because of money, right? If I'm truly a man of God and someone comes to you and says, brother, I like this shirt. Can I have that shirt? No, I'm not giving you my good Versace shirt or whatever shirt. I'd give them the shirt, because at the end of the day, what is this shirt to me? And so I think a lot of times when we look at issues or problems in our family, and I'm sure people can probably share, or if you have a story you want to share, please go ahead. Um, I think that there's a lot of opportunities where we can look at some of those scenarios and say, why do we let money and finances become an area where Satan can come in and either take men out of their positions in the home, right? And it doesn't create anything positive to take the men out of the home, right? Satan loves that. And then on the opposite, when we have wealth, or we have all these great things, and the fathers are still not in the home because they're at work all the time, and they're not instilling the values of God into the children and into their wives, it doesn't benefit them. So we have to find that balance. We have to find that understanding of, yes, we have to provide, and yes, we have to work for our families, but we also have to be parents. We also have to be loving and be kind and be present, and that's equally as important. But before we move into the next part, I wanted to go back to the money thing. So what do you guys think about this issue with money and with greed, right? What are some ways that you guys think that we can overcome this idea of, contempt or issues with money? Go ahead.
Yeah. For me, son, I kind of like this issue of money, because I'm broke. Oh wait, I'm the one. What does it says? The lender is a slave to the borrower. You know, and when I want to say the way society has gone, money has become very important. Money has become the center of everything. They say money can buy happiness. Without money, you can't get a mortgage. You can't get all this. We need money. There's no way a liar means. Money is very vital to our survival. Whereas you touched on it earlier, it's called communication within family. Because if I have a wife, she has to understand that we're going to need money in order to do these things. So how do we compromise? How do we make it work? It's not like I'm a hoarder of money, but we need money. We need to get money because, like you say, God has provided abundance of things, but the devil and man has created so many defiance for us to get that money. They brought us to turning us to slave. 9 to 5 is really like a slavery, but you have to get that money.
Right.
Trying to own your own business, it's a hard task. So this is where family comes in. The Bible says when a man chooses the wife, they become one, right? We have to move within one accord. We have to be working for the same purpose because it's how we're going to create it together. So if we stop being selfish and put our resources together, we can achieve that peace and the quiet. Because if we own a house and it's 2 salaries and we can able to pay, I might not have to work so hard. She might be able to come in with a bit of finance and chip in, because that's the way society has changed our lives to be. Furthermore, they tell you have to have an 800 credit score. One person can't even have an 800 credit score as a black man. So how does it work? So we're still at odds, you know? That's for me.
I think your wife wants to say something.
Yeah, I want to read something from the book that I've written on finances, and it says, "It is a privilege to honor God with our finances, but our hearts must be in aligned with Him to receive His promises. Creating a budget helps manage resources wisely, ensuring we live within our means and use what we have effectively. Many are encouraged to borrow recklessly, leading to debts that are hard to repay. However, God's desire is for us to be lenders and not borrowers." So what I want to say with that as well, sometimes we talk about finances, we want to be lenders and not borrowers, but we don't prepare to live within our budget. You know, we borrow recklessly and doing all those reckless stuff. And then we become poor. And sometimes we blame it on God or other people when it's our bad choices and bad decisions. How do we move forward from that as well? We keep making the same mistakes over and over, financial mistake. God has to trust us, as he said, with a little in order for him to bless us abundantly. And sometimes we're not ready for the abundance, because if we have the abundance, we're going to make the same reckless mistakes again. So we need financial wisdom. For me personally, I think financial wisdom is the most powerful tool regarding finances. And another thing as well, some people, they don't pay tithes, they don't give to the church, they don't do any of these things. And for me, that's the most essential principle of financial abundance. And being, you know, like the lender rather than the borrower is to give. And a lot of Black people, especially in the church, they don't have that principle of giving. And I think for me, that's the number one principle. Okay.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. And I think you guys touch on 2 interesting points, right? Because I think, and it's just what I kind of addressed there was, I think first, my dad talks about the fact, this idea that yes, money is important, but it's not everything. And I think when you look at that movie we watched, Kirkland, even though the mom worked 2 jobs and she brought a lot of money to the table, spoiler alert for everyone who hasn't seen the movie, she gets cancer and she gets really sick and she dies. And at the end of the day, you know, did that matter? Did her working those 2 jobs and paying the light bill and doing all those things, that in those moments it felt so important, but in the span of, eternity and your eternal life and your salvation, what is your job? What is your house? What is your car? What is all these things you worry about? What is, how valuable are those things going to be on Judgment Day? And then on the flip side, like my stepmom was saying, with the responsibility of God and these things, God tells us, right, our people perish from lack of knowledge. And when I think about our parents, when I think of my grandparents, I think of my parents, are we learning, right? Like it's okay if you don't know, it's okay if you don't have financial literacy, but I think what we see a lot in our families is that we don't go to the bank and open a GIC or a saving account, or like my dad, he always tells me, when you talk to our family in Jamaica, they don't have an ID, they don't have a a bank account, right? They don't have basic financial understanding. So we sit there, we say, oh, well, we're poor and life is hard and life is this, but what are you doing to make yourself wealthy? How are you reading about finance? Are you talking to people who know about finance, right? And sometimes I think what we're guilty of in our family is that there's members of our family that are wealthy, or there's members of our family that are good business people, and we don't want to humble ourselves. We don't want to come to those people and say, look, I have a little, take my little and help me make my little greater. And I think that when we get over that pride and we get over that thing of I'm a failure, or I didn't do this, or I don't want to go to my children, or I don't want to go this person. God has actually blessed us in a lot of ways with unconventional wealth, which is, if you have 10 kids, or you have 5 kids or 6 kids, usually one of your kids has a talent. Usually one of your cousins or your niece or nephew has a talent. You don't often have to go outside of your family to find wealth or to find a business. But what I find that we do as Black people is we disperse. You go here, you go here, you go here, you do your own thing, you do your own thing. And so, how far does that money work when it's never coming back into your community? And I think what Black people need to work on, what we need to work on as a community, is we have to work on supporting each other. We have to work on finding avenues of, hey, if Auntie Don's a good sewer, Auntie Don, sew 10 shirts. I have an event coming up. And if my dad is a good MC and he's a host, hey, I'm doing an event, come and MC, my stepmother writes books. Okay, here, write me a book, right? You're a good writer, right? Write for me. And I think when I look at, the Israel Jews and how they operate, sometimes it's like they don't even do business outside of their own people, because they have a Jewish baker, they have a Jewish tailor, they have a Jewish wedding venue, they have a Jewish photographer. Like everything they do goes back to their people. So I think that in a small sense, we have to gather each other, and we have to, you know, get each other into one place. And then we also have to invest in each other, invest in our children. And when I think about, I don't know when we talked about the birthright, and we talked about Esau giving up his birthright. But when I think about the importance of order in family and leadership, I think if families are operating under the understanding of like firstborn children, and we start to honor a lot of these systems that God has put into place, a lot of the issues that we have in our families wouldn't be happening, because if there's matriarchs and patriarchs that are telling families how to operate, and we're operating like how Christ operated in the early church, we're going to see that the administration is always looking out for the people, and it's always looking out for the family. And so I think the root cause of why we can't see this, or why that we don't see this in our families, is for the last section, which is the consequences of sexual immorality. So when I think about family and I think about what are some of our big issues, and I talked about it in that Maury example, is a lot of us aren't married. A lot of us are, a lot of people are fornicating. A lot of people are married, or they're married but they have 4 kids outside their marriage, or they're married but they're cheating on their wife all the time, or God knows, there's OnlyFans, there's all these things that are happening that it goes against the code that God had. And so First Corinthians says, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against their own body. And I know that for a lot of people, we get into this mindset of, oh, well, you don't understand what it's like to have a porn addiction, or, I love women, or my husband doesn't give me enough attention, or I like the attention of men, so that's why I dress this way. And when I think about a lot of issues in our families, and I think about our daughters, right? I think about how fighting in families and children out of wedlock, think about how that promotes promiscuity in our daughters. And when our daughters go and get pregnant and bring these children up, there's no father in those children's lives, right? So those children don't have order. They don't have respect. So now you're a mother in a home upset with your son about him not listening to you and him not having structure and him going off the path. But where's his dad? Where is your husband? Where is the man that's supposed to be putting instruction into your child? And I think what we see a lot, unfortunately, in the Black community is that there's a lot of unmarried Black women in our community. There's a lot of children, there's a lot of women, but there's not a lot of marriages, there's not a lot of homes. And so we really have to do what we see in other communities, which is push our children to get married, push our children to have relationships with people that they're married to, not fornicate, not have a boyfriend and have this and entertain this garbage. It's 3 or 4 generations of children out of wedlock. When are we going to start to say, you know what, this is wrong? Like, this is not what we should be doing. Like, I think I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. If I can look at my parents and see that, or I was talking to my mom about this morning. If you look at the if you look at the way that our grandparents raised us, right? Kept us in the Bible, told us, don't do this, praise God, get married, right? And then you look at what sometimes, well, that would be my great grandparents. And then I look at what my grandparents, and sometimes even my parents' generation, they start teaching us, right? Well, you can go to play mass, and you can have a boyfriend and you can have a girlfriend. And I understand that it's hard to tell your children not to do these things. I understand no one wants to be the person to constantly tell everybody, hey, you need to go to church, hey, you need to do this. But as a parent, if you're not telling your children to do these things, and that's not what you do every day, and that's not what your goal is or your purpose, what is it that you're instilling into your children? And so I don't understand. And if somebody wants to chime in and explain to me what the point of parenting is, I'm assuming that the role of being parents and the role of us being in a community or being in a family is that we're actually going to teach the children and we're going to teach each other and hold each other accountable and say, hey, when we're going to get married, don't go sleep with the man and move in with him and do all this stuff before you guys get married. Don't go have children and then try and marry him. Don't go have sex with him and then decide in your mind that, okay, now you like him and now you guys want to get engaged. No, if you're going to do it right from the beginning, right? And so I think when we go to 1 Corinthians and 10:3, it says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so you can endure it. So what does that tell us? If you stay, it's because you wanted to stay. God always gives you a way out. God always gives you a way that you can come out. And so we have to start to look at a lot of those scenarios and those situations and start saying to ourselves, do I have a problem or do I want a problem? And it goes into our final question as we wrap things up, which says, considering 1 Corinthians 10:30, how did recognizing escape route help you overcome that challenge? Does anybody want to share what's a time where you experienced God's provision in escaping a difficult situation? And how did you discover the escape route that helps you overcome that challenge?
I think, Christopher, once I had a dream that this guy, he was trying to put some kind of sort of, I would say, intimate conversation to me.
Mhm.
And I got up and I said to Chris, we were in Jamaica, and I said, I don't understand why he would have that conversation because we're friends and he's actually my taxi driver.
Right.
So I had a dream and I prayed in it, and then he picked me up at the airport and he was actually having that conversation. And then I dropped my pods, you know, the AirPods in the car
Right.
while he was driving. And I said, okay, when he parked up, I will look under the seat and retrieve it. However, I forgot when I came out of the car. And then he was calling me to drop it off at my house. And I thought, no, 9 o'clock in the night, you're not going to drop it. So I waited until I was in my car park the daytime. I said, come and drop it off. And I believe God already gone before that kind of temptation, because obviously he showed me that this is what's going to happen. And also my AirPods drop in the car, that was a setup for me to probably even have a conversation with him. But God had provided that escape route for me by gone ahead and tell me that this is what's going to happen. So the night when he was going to drop the thing off for me, I said, no, drop it in the daytime, meet me in the car park. And that was it. So I believe that was my escape route, not to have that conversation or even face having that conversation with that person.
Right. Yeah, that's yeah, and that's a good example too, right? Sometimes it's like we know. Sometimes we know. We already know some people that we should avoid, and we know, and I feel like Satan is so good sometimes at like there's so many good people in our lives. And if one bad thing happens or two bad things happen, we cut those people off. But then we have some of those I shouldn't say trash, but we have some of those people that I don't know, like they linger. They stick around. They're like bad news sometimes. And I feel like those people are sometimes the hardest people to get out of our lives. So yeah, no, for sure. Anybody else have an instance where they can think of, a time where they experienced God's provision in a difficult situation, and how did you recognize God's escape route?
Let me tell a story about
Yeah, go ahead.
what. How you doing? Like, you know, I tell people that God has always been in my life and He's always been there for me in my time of need. And I can remember one instance where I was doing something. I was hanging out with some guys, and we were living. While I was away, I was in jail, and I got out of jail, and I had reunited some of my old buddies, and we were like hanging out of this condo. He had a really nice condo up in Yorkville.
Mhm,
We used to hang out and just cook all the time,
mhm,
And he'd say, "Man, you got to get back into this because there's so much money. I, you can buy a Mercedes in no time or a new house, just chill, man. It's all good." So I used to be just lounging around there, just cooking food, eating food, you know what I'm saying, getting money in my pocket for free because I wasn't really doing anything.
right,
And one day he said to me, "Listen, man, it's about time you start doing your thing." And I was like, "Nah, I don't really think I want to do this." And he's like, "What do you mean you don't want to do this? Like, this is this is it, I'm like, "Nah, I'm just not feeling it." So he's like, "Oh, you don't respect me. You're very disrespectful. You don't think me. I want to help you, and you know, you're just a one-hit wonder. You can't do this again. You're such a, like I'm a loser and all like that.
right.
And we had this big riff right there at the gas station. I remember right there, you're there. And I went my way. The next couple of days, the federal police busted his house and he was arrested and taken to prison. The same
Mm,
house I used to hang out with. You know what I'm saying?
right,
Oh, God provided a way for me that night for me to have that hashed out conversation. You know what I'm saying? Because I
right.
would have been up in that same place. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, so I see where God provides some rules. That's why sometimes when things are happening in our life and we don't understand it, we just have to let it happen because we don't know what God's plans are.
Yeah. And that's a great example too, that the mercy of God is sometimes so good, because you could have, stayed hanging around those people and ended up like them. You could have ended up in jail, or, worse, you could end up dead. And we see that with people all the time. So let's go to the next slide. So as we conclude today, I just want to retouch on some of the points that we talked to. I know we talked about ways that we can reunite our family. And so, one was not to argue with them. I know that that's hard. I know it's very hard. I think when we love people, we're prone to be more passionate and we care about what they say and their opinions prick us. And I know when it comes to your spouse, nothing hurts more than when they say things to you. And I think we just have to really understand that patience and that element of, again, Christ, what would Christ do? How does Christ operate? And then another one is not to over preach. I know that sometimes, yes, we want to share the word. Yes, we want to tell people about it. Sometimes silence is the best thing that we can offer, right? Sometimes people are not always ready to hear that message from us. And sometimes we're not also supposed to be those people to constantly bring that message to them. And, I hope today we saw that there was so many other tools that we could add to our repertoire in terms of communication, in terms of making amends, apologizing, right? I think sometimes we just want to preach to people, but then we don't want to do things like listen. We don't want to validate. We don't want to apologize. We don't want to understand them or get to know them. And I think sometimes we have to lose that pride and lose that sense of, well, I'm right and they're wrong, or, I never did anything. Why should I have to apologize? And just really think to yourself, right? Christ died for you and he never did anything. So what does it take from you to do that? And pray is important. I think taking time to pray with people and to pray for your family is important, and to also show love and support. And I think out of all these things, they're all free. They cost $0. And so when I think about a lot of people and I think about some of the excuses they make for not showing love and supporting their family, how many people say, "Oh, I'm broke. I don't have no money. I can't travel. I can't this." But I'm like, okay, but a lot of these things are free. How much is praying for your family? How much is not arguing or having a good attitude when you do see them? That's free. So I think that if we can embody a lot of these things and a lot of these traits and these attitudes and these mindsets and bring these into our family lives, I think that we'll see a change. We'll see a big transformation. And so um, that's it for this week. I know it was a little bit longer, but um, I know we had some really good conversations and everyone brought up some good points. Was there any testimonies, any things that people wanted to share or to pray about before we close out in prayer? Well, I guess I'll do what we kind of did last week. I know some people weren't here, but I'm just curious to see if anyone made any progress on some of their goals from last week, and I'm just gonna hold them up here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my task yesterday, I went to Luton. I went to Luton town
Nice.
in the country. I took a couple hours drive to visit a friend that I known from a long time, him and his wife. Oh, we got there. We brought out the book that my wife wrote, and we wrote, which chapter did we read?
Marriage.
Marriage. We read a chapter about marriage, and we prayed for them and we prayed with them. And they said, all the people that have always come to their house to visit, nobody ever came and prayed with them. And it was just a wonderful thing. We just blessed them and blessed their house, and then we were on our way. So
Yeah.
I was out there, son.
And so did you ever get your neighbor's name? What's your neighbor's name?
I never see them.
You don't see them?
No, I only saw her one time. The girl about the cats. Yeah, I never seen them again.
Okay, well, that's so good. And That's so sad. Like, because how old are these people?
It's older than you.
My age group.
Yeah, because I'm like think about that. Like, people come to your house and no one ever prays.
Yeah. And they never, nobody ever done that, they said. And it was such a charming conversation because they had a grandson there. We were talking about the same concept about married, you know? He's
Mhm.
23 and he has this girl that's pregnant. And I was asking him, are you gonna marry her? And you know what the family was telling him? Oh, don't rush into things. So I said, what do you mean? He got her pregnant. How are you telling him not to rush into things? You know, you should have considered that before he got her pregnant, you know? So
Right.
it was just a big thing. We were like, you know, and at the time, I was looking at like I'm in these people house. Am I being disrespectful? You know, because they're it's their house and they're telling their grandson not to marry. I'm telling them no, that's not the right concept. But like you say, we have to preach the gospel with one hand, and then people are gonna be offended in the other hand. You know?
Yeah, you have to do the work in one hand, and then you have to defend.
Yeah,
You have to
because
defend yourself in the other.
yeah, because they think they know what's best for their grandchild, and here's me trying to tell them no, that's not it. You know?
Yeah, and you know it's funny. Sometimes it's not that what they're telling him is coming from uh a bad place, but also it's like I was saying to you, it's like educating him, right? Because it's saying to him, they probably never told him, hey, you're not allowed to go out to the raves or go out to the bar or the pub and have drinks, right? So then now if he goes and has sex and gets some girl pregnant, wow, now you're gonna tell him about marriage? Yeah, I haven't even told, like, there's so much foundational things that I feel like because we don't teach our children these things, this is why they do these things. And I think a lot of parents, unfortunately, don't draw that parallel between, like, like I'm not gonna call my sisters or my brother and sisters names about things, but I think in a lot of those situations, we see the difference in households where if your parents aren't really doing certain things and teaching you things, it's hard to have this expectation that you're going to come out and be, you know, you're not going to follow a lot of those precepts from the Bible because, well, at home, we don't pray. And at home, mom and dad don't make me go to church. And, you know, right? So, yeah, I think that's so good. I know Letitia said that she wanted to reach out to some of her acquaintances, and I know that she planned some of those things. Mara, I know you said you wanted to do a get together, so um, yeah, still waiting on that. I would love to hear sometime, or I know you said your schedule's a little difficult. And then I think that was it. I don't think Anika, you weren't here last week, and Auntie Don, I know you weren't able, but this week, um, I like for us to set a goal, or one goal can be um whatever you want, but I'd like a goal for themselves about something that we can do to enhance our relationship with our families. And I'll go first. I think, and excuse me, I kind of have a head start because I feel like I started this week. I reached out to some of my aunts. I talked to my Auntie Pam, and we had a good conversation, 3 hours. And I learned a lot about her. I learned about, her marriage and her life and her walk with God. And so I'd like to reach out to some more of my family members that, are kind of on the fringe that I know, but I don't really know them and I don't know a lot about them, and kind of hear their testimonies and hear their walk with God. So that's one challenge that I give to myself, which is to intentionally spend time with my family to understand them and learn about them, and see where they come from and understand where they come from, because I think that after I had that conversation with my Aunt Pam, there was a lot of things about her that I didn't understand, and after having that conversation with her, I think maybe sometimes she could come off as an abrasive person, but then having that conversation with her, I gained a lot of respect for her and I could understand why she is the way that she is. And it was a really beautiful and uplifting conversation by the end. So, that's a challenge that I set for myself. So let's see who we have. So, Anika, I know you were just in Jamaica, but what's something that you can do, Anika, this week to enhance your family life? I don't know if she's here.
I'm here. Yeah. So while I was in Jamaica, I did spend a lot of time with both sides of my family. So, and my husband's family. So I'm gonna say maybe spending some more time with my paternal grandmother, like talking to her a lot more. I get to speak to my maternal grandmother more frequently than I do with my paternal. And that sometimes is because of her phone issues or me just being busy and not remembering. So I kind of want to implement even speaking to her weekly or bi-weekly. So that's one thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then my dad, what's something that you can do to enhance your family life this week?
Me and my family life. I think my family life needs a lot of repair work, you know. Yeah. Well, actually, I'm taking steps to do that. First of all, I'm here in England with my wife, so we're doing a great family bonding and we're really connecting. So I'm happy for that. You know, what did Auntie Dan say? Happy wife, happy life. So I'm trying to make that connection. So next, it'd be speaking more with my sisters. I have a few sisters that me and them need to get back in connection with. And then we just take it from there, you know? And also kids too. I got a whole heap of work. So I'm just 2025 resolution is I gotta get it done, you know?
Okay, so what's one thing you can do this week?
This week, I think I'm gonna connect with my wife this week. Yeah, on a different level, you know. That's what my plan is for this week. Yeah.
Okay, good. And you're going to utilize some of those communication receiving strategies, right?
Yeah, you know what I mean, son? Yeah. I hope she also are gonna use them too. You know, we both gonna exercise them, you know what I'm saying?
All right, you're gonna help her and remind
Yeah.
her of those things. Okay, yeah, that's really good. And then Raymond, since you're already there, I'll just ask you what yours is.
Okay. For me, I've got family members who I know God showed me that I'm the bridge to bring them over to Christ. So I
Okay.
need out a bit more just to give a word of encouragement, pray with them a little bit more. So this week, I'm a nephew, I haven't touched base with him for a long time, a niece. So I think this week I will make that my duty to call them, reach out to them, share the scriptures, and probably pray with them.
Are they in England or are they in
They are actually in England, yeah, but everyone's quite busy. My nephew's working 7 days a week.
oh,
Yeah, but just definitely that's my thing to do this week is to reach out, even if it's for half an hour, just to say how things going, share the scriptures, see how their spiritual life is, and pray with them. Yeah.
yeah, that's great. And then Letitia, what is your goal for your family life this week?
Yeah, so I think for me, I used to have a cousins group, and it's kind of fallen off over the past couple of years due to actually no good reason. I think everybody just kind of had an excuse that they were all busy, but I think this week what I wanted to do, and it's actually been on my heart for quite some time, is to get that group back up and running. Um, and just kind of reach out and see how everybody's doing and see if we can have maybe a get together and in that get together start to talk a little bit more about what's happening in their lives and see where I can maybe slow drip what I believe in the word of God and have some great conversations. So I'm hoping that I can do that this week.
Nice. And then Mara, what is something that you can do for your family?